Welcome back, sci-fi fans, to the Science Fictionary podcast. I'm Andrew, and I'm here with Marisha, as always. Usually as always. That's what they
It's usual.
So let's see. Nicole's in the chat,
Hi,
and
Nicole.
I think so far that's it. But
Me? I'm there. See,
oh well, yeah, but you're here too. So
but I'm also in the chat because I'm just that great.
it's true.
Good answer, love. See, he's a smart man.
Um,
Gentlemen, this is how to answer whenever people go fishing for compliments. Your wife goes fishing for compliments.
If your wife goes, like usually if people go fishing for compliments, I ignore them. But if your wife's fishing for compliments, just go ahead and do it.
Yeah, it's in your best interest. The secret to a happy marriage, ladies and gentlemen.
So we're going to talk about episode 5 of Miss Marvel.
Yes, it's true.
And hopefully some more people will pop here into the chat here in a minute, because I want to see what Nicole says, that she's really excited to talk about it. I want to see what some other people thought about it too. And I really hope that more people.
Sorry.
I want to see if more people are starting to discover the show now that some of the other things.
Yep. Now that Kenobi's not on anymore.
Kenobi's off. Stranger Things is done with the season. If everybody's watched it right away, which I suspect most people that were really into it did.
Probably.
There are still a few other things floating around out there, like The Boys, but that really doesn't compete with this. It's not two totally different groups of people typically going to watch those two things.
Most people are not watching both of those.
Well, there's some overlap, I'm sure, but
but it's probably mostly people who are watching Miss Marvel with their kids, and they're watching The Boys by themselves.
Right. Yeah, The Boys is definitely not family
not
fair.
Family friendly.
So overall, this was our time travel episode.
This was great.
Going back in time, they didn't overthink the time travel stuff, which is great.
God.
But it was simple. They did what you would call a closed loop time travel episode, where it's like when Loki wants to know why all the things the Avengers didn't mess things up. Well, it was supposed to happen. It didn't create alternate timelines. It was supposed to happen that way. That's what happened here. It's a closed loop. She goes back because she's supposed to go back. It's part of her story. So that's a much easier type of time travel to deal with. I love to borrow a phrase from Roe, this was the most cinematic episode, largely because of the stuff in the train station. It just felt bigger than a TV show.
It really did. I'm just watching going, that's a lot of background.
You were having
a lot of background. I hope they had enough people there to wrangle all those backgrounds.
But that was really cool that, they bothered to do a scene that big with that many background and the characters. TV shows don't normally go in for stuff like that.
And I feel like,
and they could have done that digitally and
they
just had people in. I'm glad they didn't do that.
And also the thing is, they were going for a very specific image, and we were watching with my 8-year-old nephew. He's not 8 anymore. He's more like 10. Either way, my nephew, right? And he says, wow, was it really that desperate?
Yeah, because they realized it was the last train and saw how many people are still standing around.
Like,
when
there
the
are
train
people on top
leaves
of that train. Did people ride on tops of trains? He was like, it was an excellent example of show don't tell. Like, they had given us just enough information that we were prepared, but whenever they actually showed up on screen, it was like, wow, that's really significant.
And this was, this was a really desperate time for the whole world, really.
Yeah.
Because one thing they didn't touch on, this starts in 1942. Like 1947 is when the partition happens, but this episode starts in 1942. And so, of course, Britain's at war.
Yeah.
And they didn't really touch on any of that because like 100,000 Indian soldiers were sent to fight in that war on behalf of Britain.
Yep.
as were people from all over the world that were still living under the crown.
Right. I mean, Canadian soldiers. In fact, I remember reading like Anne of Green Gables books. Like there's a whole series of them, and I didn't realize that Canadians were actually went, fought in World War I and World War II as
British
soldiers.
Yeah. No, the crown or the, it wasn't really the crown at that point. They still consider it the crown, but the crown called them home to fight.
Yeah.
Well, it's just like all during when the British or the Germans did the same thing. They called for people to return to Germany and fight.
Yeah.
So, people that weren't even under German rule returned to Germany to fight. But the Indians didn't have a choice. I mean, when you read it in the history books, it literally talks about, Britain literally declared war on Germany on behalf of India.
Yeah.
And the difference is a lot of people that were under the crown that were going and fighting were British or descendants of British,
or at least were anti-German.
Right. And these people weren't. In fact, I'm relatively certain there was a strong Marxist contingent growing in India at the time. So it's that was a hard thing, and it's not to get real deep into it because I don't want to get necessarily into the politics of it, but the partition was basically, I mean, Britain was broke and wanted out.
Yeah.
And this is after, Britain has to some extent been in control since like the 1750s.
In one form or the other, yeah.
Right. I mean, whether it was the East India Company or the Crown itself,
right.
Britain was essentially in control of India for a very, very long time. And then basically you just have the government that's been keeping order, and just whether they did, not even getting into whether the things they did were good or bad, but just you have this government that's kept order, just saying we're out.
They weren't. I was doing some kind of reading on it because I'm a history nerd, and I was like, oh, this isn't necessarily my area that I tend to be well informed on. So I did a lot of reading on it today. The British weren't supposed to leave till 1948, but they realized there was going to be a civil war because there had been a big movement both for and against the creation of Pakistan. There were two really significant political factions that had just been fighting for decades about whether or not there should be a Muslim state. And the British just finally were like, they basically saw there's going to be a war, and so we're going to get out before it starts.
Yeah. So, I mean, basically they orchestrate the splitting of the country into Pakistan and India.
Yep.
And then they just leave. And they leave a country in absolute chaos because they didn't stay to help people relocate. They just but they didn't have the money.
And also I don't think they were expecting mass migrations. They were just like, okay, we're going to split this up, and then then the areas with mostly Muslim, a Muslim majority will have their own government. People with a mostly Hindu population will have their own government, and they can just move on from there.
Yeah.
But what happened was there just started to be, even I saw some reference to it as ethnic cleansing on both sides, and just enormous amounts of people being displaced. Lots of people leaving Pakistan to go to India. Lots of Hindus leaving Pakistan to go to India. Lots of Muslims. There was just a mass migration both directions. One of the biggest mass migrations apparently in documented history.
Right.
And the numbers of people that died, like the estimates the British gave were like 200,000. High estimates put it at closer to 2 million people just died, disappeared, never made it where to whichever country it was they were heading to. It was just unbelievably horrible.
And I mean, I'm glad. I agree, Nicole. I'm glad that they didn't make it about World War II. I'm surprised there was not some sort of mention of it, especially in Hassan's speech that you hear him giving at the beginning, talking about how this is their country. Because I mean, that was what they were riled up about at the time, was that this was their land and they really had no control over it.
And you're sending our son to die in your wars. I mean,
Yeah, but I'm
don't like
glad they
that.
focused on something else, because most Westerners don't know anything about the partition. I was aware that it happened, but I knew nothing about it.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think most of us graduate especially from high school, with an extremely narrow view of world history. And like, I mean, let's be honest, like, you come out of high school, like, I don't even know how much of world history you can legitimately touch in 4 years of high school history. Like, I mean, you're only going to be able to touch on so many things. And as someone who graduated with, I mean, I have an art degree, I have a photography degree, but I had 2 other majors prior to that. And I was only needed like 3 more classes to have a history degree. And we never covered any of that.
No. There was a lot of talk, there's a lot of conversations about the initial British occupation of India. I knew that Gandhi had been involved in ending it. Apparently Gandhi was vehemently opposed to the partition, and just basically got overruled. And I knew that there was a lot of bad blood between Pakistan and India. To this day, there's just a lot of animosity and a lot of.
Yeah, I think the partition was Britain's last ditch effort to prevent a civil war.
Yeah.
But basically, they created 2 countries that have had nukes aimed at each other ever since. So.
Yeah, not so helpful.
Right. But let's get into the episode. So I really like this episode. I like the backstory. I like going back and doing this story with Aisha and Hassan. What did you think about the episode overall?
So I always enjoy, as much as I complain about time travel, I don't like dealing with the fallout of time travel, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't like dealing with fixing the timelines and I don't like what it does to stories, but I always enjoy the time travel aspect. That's always, a really interesting story. Like I said, I don't tend to like the stories that come after the time travel.
Right. Yeah, this one's different. This one's we've kind of moved this from, I would say, as we've progressed, we've really kind of moved, and I don't know where they'll go with the character. And they probably won't do this because it's much more of a fantasy trope than they've typically gone into in the MCU. But this character is a character of destiny. Like, it was her destiny to have that moment to go back,
right,
and save her grandmother. It's so I like how simplified the time travel was, and it was this moment that she was destined to go back and fulfill.
Right.
Not that they just decided to go back and change the past. It was a moment that she was destined for, which is kind of a cool thing we've got going here. And we kind of did some of this with Shang-Chi. There's some similarities here, but when you get into big fantasy epics, I specifically always go to Lord of the Rings because that's the one, right?
Right.
So you go to Lord of the Rings.
Fantasy story.
This is a child born of 2 cultures.
Right.
One that we believe is immortal, one not.
Right.
There's very much echoes of, and those moments are always big moments, big history. In Tolkien, those are all huge moments in the story.
Yeah.
Like in his thousands of year history, there's 3 moments that all hinge on children born between men and elves. It's like the big driving thing of most of the histories. Right. And so I like that there's kind of some of those fantasy echoes in here, because the MCU has tended to be very sci-fi heavy, which is fine. I love that. But with this and Shang-Chi, I'm glad we're getting some. And if we ever bring Iron Fist back in, some of those things, we're starting to get echoes of more fantasy storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm excited about that.
Yeah. It's always, I mean, you can only go straight sci-fi for so long before eventually you kind of have to broaden your story. I mean, you know, you have to start kind of broadening your base a little bit.
Right. Yeah, so this is the interesting thing, because theoretically, this type of time travel is kind of like what happened with the Avengers. It doesn't create an alternate timeline, therefore, there's not a moment that
It
creates
always
an offshoot.
but it does create the question, like, how is this? Why doesn't it create an alternate timeline?
Because it was destined to happen. We've introduced the idea of destiny into the MCU.
Yeah.
That's a fantasy trope.
Although you could argue that it does create another timeline.
Well, you could say, or
there could be a timeline where she never went back,
true.
and that she just remembers this is a family story because now it's happened.
Except that this is a closed loop, and the TVA has never shown up and stopped it.
Yeah.
But that also goes back to my argument about the TVA time travel and Loki being circular, and that, with every moment of time happening all at once, that the TVA both exists and doesn't exist at the same time.
Schrodinger's agency.
Pretty much. I mean, but seriously, like, if that's the way we're going to look at time, then the TVA both and the multiverse itself both simultaneously exist and don't.
I'll take your word for it. No, it's.
But I mean, seriously, like, if time is circular, like, you can't have both, or you have to have both. You can't have one.
I'll take your word for it. I'll think through it later. I'm getting a migraine, so my reasoning capacity isn't quite there.
What did you think about just the story? We get the 5 years with Hassan and Aisha.
It was so sweet. I mean, you always. I'm a romantic, so I always will go in for the little moments and the kind of the sweet, innocent kind of the love story. I'm always going to be a sucker for that.
Right.
And man, the whole. Sometimes it's easy to forget in looking at large tragedies in history, it's those it's all of these numbers are a person, who had a father and mother and children and brothers and sisters who, and it's that personal, like, where's my baby moment, it's like it was, I may have cried a little bit. I may have cried just a little bit.
Which part specifically made you cry?
So I'm pretty sure I cried whenever she was, whenever after they had the baby and she's singing to the baby, and it's like that moment where it just all seems right in the world, right? She's escaped, and like but the thing is, the rest of the story, and so it's like you're just looking at it and you're like, oh no, your little paradise is getting ready to come crashing down.
Yeah.
I think I may have cried whenever it was confirmed that she died, because that's not what I was expecting. I was expecting she ran off, she was fighting, she was something. I didn't expect she's dead.
Yeah. I figured she was when I said last week that I thought that it would be Kamala that saved her grandmother. So I kind of, that theory kind of hinged on Aisha dying. I wasn't sure how that was going to happen. But I mean, it's not, there's not a grand battle. I mean, she just stabs her.
Yeah.
But
they're on all those people that that train platform full of people. It's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things going on here that really really I've found to be some of the most touching moments in the
Mm-hmm.
series so far. And I think it's what makes it, other than just kind of the grand scale of the train station, which just cinematically puts this as, that's cinematically throws that up there with the top scenes in the Disney Plus Marvel Cinematic stuff.
Yeah.
So, but really, we get this moment where we have a couple of things happen where Kamala has heard this story her whole life.
Right.
But it's kind of a fairy tale kind of thing. It's not very real. And you couldn't possibly understand something like the partition without being in the middle of it.
You see her walk in there and she's like, just that many people, that many,
And she finally understands where her family came from. Like she gets a picture of a better understanding of where her family came from and why her family fights for the things they fight for her. It's really, the thing every parent wants is, the better life for their kids. This one's just a really dramatic version of it. Like it's, but I mean, it's like, my grandfather growing up 10 years old, dragging, hauling pulpwood by hand, dragging pulpwood logs out of the woods because they had no money.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, she gets a better understanding, but the moment where her mother sees her and she doesn't freak out.
I cried there too.
Well, there's two things that happen. One is the really funny thing, which is the mother thing, specifically, I think, immigrant mother thing. The first thing she asked is, "Who is this boy?"
Yeah. That would probably be my first question.
Well, I mean, like as a parent of two girls, it's like, yeah, that's the first question you ask is, who the heck is his?
Yeah.
But she has this moment where she could either get mad or she could soften. And she chooses to soften, and she finally understands that the things that she has held against her mother, because she has a lot of animosity towards her mother.
Yeah.
Because her mother refused to quit believing in fairy tales.
Right.
And what you really wind up with is a story of generational healing.
Well, because I mean, that's what we do, right? We pass down our trauma to our children. That's human
we
nature.
Not only pass down our trauma to children, they don't understand the trauma.
Right. And so it like affects and I feel like as an adult, a lot of things that I've had, issues with my parents over, when I was younger, it's like now that I have children, I'm like, like I understand, like maybe they weren't 100% right all the time, but I understand why they felt the way they did, acted the way they did, because, like the world can be a scary place. And especially if you have experience with the world being a scary place.
Yeah.
And I feel like, the mom has, she's had her moment of being the rebel child because, her mom just was, had trauma, and so here she is, she's got the child now, but now it's different when you're the parent. All of a sudden those things that seem like so much fun when you were 17 aren't quite so much fun whenever you've got teenagers yourself.
Yeah.
So but yeah, no, and because we had speculated a lot, like did the mom, like how much did the mom know? But apparently she never bought any of it. She just thought that her mother was just, I guess, just coping, that this was her coping mechanism, was this story that she'd always told about how she made it on the train. Like whenever she actually sees all of this happening, she like totally is in immediately, which is not exactly what we thought. She was, we thought that she knew things, that there were some of this stuff had gone on, but apparently she never believed any of it. She just didn't want any ties to the crazy.
Right.
So it wasn't specifically like, I know things about that bangle. It was, that's a symbol of the crazy, and I don't want anything to do with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because there was some
that.
kind of back and forth over what the mother actually knew.
Right. Yeah.
And I think what I kind of thought it was all along is what it was she just believed it was fairy tales, and her mother was just obsessed, and she believed that it had run her father off and caused her to have a lesser childhood than she could have, and because of the obsession. So I'm really, really happy with those scenes. Like, I think that this is the first time the three of those characters, the three generations of this family, have not had some sort of barrier preventing them from fully embracing each other.
And and even with that whole speech about her mother should be ashamed of herself, that she gave earlier, it's like when it came down to it, and it's her kid, maybe she should have been less judgy about the hypothetical mother, but when it came down to it, she has the best reaction. Like, she's completely, and I think it's always a tendency, a danger to automatically assume the worst, but she automatically assumes like you're doing the good things.
So at this point, like, we got another piece of the costume, or at least another piece of the fabric that will become the costume, and that's kind of been one of the cool things. It's been very video game-ish.
Yeah.
And that kind of each mission along the way, she gets another piece of the fabric that will eventually become the costume. But I'm leaning even heavier now towards the mother's going to actually create the costume.
Yeah. Well, clearly the mom's got skills, mad skills. The Hulk, father-daughter Hulk.
One thing we never talked about on here was I love that they brought the Hulk costume back around during the wedding.
Yes,
scene.
For the little brother. That was epic. That was really, really great. The other thing that I thought was really an interesting, like, clearly Aisha has a pretty clear understanding of how all of this works. Because when Kamala shows up, she assumes it's Sasa. She assumes it's her baby.
Sana, yeah.
Sana, yeah. And so that I wasn't really, whenever I was like, well, yeah, that kind of tracks. That would be, if she knows that time travel, kind of is a factor here. It's not surprising that was her initial assumption. And even whenever she told her that she wasn't, it reminds me whenever my great grandmother was at the end of her life and we would come visit, she didn't know who we were anymore, but she knew we were hers. Like, she couldn't necessarily put a name to it, but she knew that we were hers. And I feel like that's kind of the sort of the feeling you get. It's like,
we already know they can also sense the north, the light.
Yeah.
Because that's how she knew that Najma had come for her.
Right.
But they can sense each other in some sense. So
yeah.
So yeah, she knew that this was, she just didn't know what, she thought it was her daughter.
Right. And clearly she's got some kind of connection with this thing, with this bangle, even when she's not wearing it, which was surprising. That was an interesting, clearly there's some kind of link. There's some kind of genetic link that they have going, because she's able to activate it on some level from away when she's not even wearing it.
Yeah. So as far as that, so here's the thing, and we need to talk about the bangle itself. Because didn't they tell us earlier on that they needed both bangles to open the rift, the veil between dimensions?
They thought they did.
Okay.
But maybe they didn't. Maybe they were wrong. Maybe that wasn't the missing factor. Maybe the missing factor was whatever.
Well, maybe there's only one.
Kamala's got going on. Yeah.
Did the bangle glow when Aisha passes, when she dies? Did the bangle glow then?
I think so, but I don't remember. I don't.
But I'm trying to now. I want to go, because that's the thing about doing this the same day I watched it for the first time, is now I'm going, because now that I'm thinking back, Najma sends, she dies to close the void, but she basically sends her spirit
or something power
into her son. Well, see, I think it's going to be maybe more than her power, that maybe she's going to be able to control him.
Oh, I hope not.
They may or may not do that. I kind of think that's where that's headed. We'll have to see what plays out there, but I'm wondering if there was something similar with the bangle when Aisha dies. If her, the essence, the nur, the light, whatever it is, isn't attached to the bangle or to Kamala, or because Kamala's, we get the indication that she's more powerful when she comes back, or at least has better control.
Right.
So, I'm really interested. I want to see where they go with fleshing that out.
And Neil, did it look to you like the little girl was making the stars appear? Like, because Kamala says, "I'm doing that." I was like, I didn't think you were doing that. I thought Grandma was doing that.
I'm not sure. It's kind of the one breaks,
right?
And so yeah, I mean, maybe that was Aisha, or the grandmother. That's the other thing we've never learned. Did Grandma ever put this bangle on?
Didn't we see her put it on?
The kid?
Oh, yeah.
Well, like her grandmother.
She was wearing it.
Well, she's wearing it when she's a kid.
But did she ever activate it?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right, Nicole. Her eyes do glow purple right there when she sends out that pulse. So I almost wonder if she wasn't responsible for pulling Kamala. If she wasn't, if she wasn't the one who pulled her there.
Yeah. Maybe so. And we don't really know. I mean, we get the idea that these are, the jinn or the nur, or whatever we want to call them, or a fourth dimensional being, meaning that they exist outside of time. They're they're light, they're immortal. And so, like, I mean, what does physical death in our realm even mean for them?
I mean, I don't know. It's an interesting question. Clearly, they do still have skeletons. Oh, yeah. We got to see the skeletons. That is not what I was expecting.
Hey, Jugger Voice, thanks for popping in the chat here. We got a little more to go, but we're still really enjoying this series. I think they've done an excellent job with the writing. I think they've done a lot of really good things. What is Aramis Knight's character's name?
Red Dagger.
What's the Red Dagger? What's his actual name?
Kareem.
Because he's just one of the Red Daggers. The Red Daggers is like a secret organization.
Yeah.
But he will be known as the Red Dagger. It's kind of like the Black Widow, or the Black Widow.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah.
They're all Black Widows. It's just that we call her that in context of the team. But I think that he was a really good character. I'm really interested to see where they go with him. I would actually like to see, they probably won't do this, but I would really love to see a Red Dagger spinoff.
Yeah, I think so.
And I mean, they kind of almost set it up like that's where they're headed with it. But it's also possible that he just winds up being part of the Young Avengers whenever they get around to doing that. If they don't hurry up, though, they're all going to be the young adult Avengers.
Yeah, right. Not the kid Avengers, the 20-something Avengers. I mean, I guess it's fine.
But I think the overall stories here were her understanding where she came from, the generational healing between the three generations of the family, and really four generations, because they're also able to now understand what happened to Aisha,
Right.
because her disappearance is what created a lot of the problem from the start.
Well, yeah, because people automatically believe the worst of her. Like they were, assume like, oh, she's gone off and is, a bigamist, and she's got multiple families going.
Yeah.
So it's kind of it's
Joker. I couldn't remember the name. If you'll leave it here in the chat again, I'm going to look him up as soon as we're done tonight. I definitely wanted to do that.
Here we go. I'll take a picture of it, because we were talking about that the other day.
Okay, you got it down there. Thank you. Yeah. I will definitely look that up as soon as we're done tonight.
Yeah, we were talking about it at some point during the week, and Andrew says, I can't remember his name. And it requires going back and looking through through the chat, and it's been a week.
Yeah. So, I mean, that pretty much covers the episode. I mean, Kamran has gotten his powers, whatever that means, whether he is totally in control or not.
No, bless his little heart. He's just so daggum nice. His niceness is just going to get him in more trouble.
Yeah, Bruno's an interesting character, though, and one that could be pretty critical going forward. I mean, he could be our new, he might not be the new Tony Stark, but he could be the new Howard Stark in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I don't think they're going to, make him a superhero, but he certainly could be kind of fill a new Howard Stark role. I mean, he's got the Nikola. I love the Nikola Tesla poster on his wall, and Kamran says, "Oh, you're a car guy."
Geez, it was a wonder we haven't hung out before, which of course just went over the kids' heads, but I thought it was a fun joke.
And so, that's kind of the last thing to talk about here is the ending. Kamran is running from damage control.
Right.
So I guess here's the question: is damage control? Yeah, that's definitely where they're trying to go, Joker. That's going to be one, because this show actually makes me think that maybe they will go to greater lengths than I initially thought they would to reinvent that character instead of going straight with the comic book story, because they really retooled a lot of things with Miss Marvel to make her work better in the MCU. Mm-hmm. So I'm hoping that they will do some retooling with Riri Williams as well, because while this comic has had failed runs, it's largely been an accepted character, where Ironheart has mostly been a failure as a comic book. So but definitely be interesting to see what they do there.
Yeah. And they seem to have done a pretty good job of sometimes pulling characters that weren't necessarily the most popular in the comic books and still making them really relatable.
Yeah.
And
I mean, it's one, like, I obviously don't want them to just make a stinker of a show. And I think they're going to have to retool the Riri Williams character to make her work. I don't think, I've never read those comics. I have kind of like read the general synopsis of the comic run. Yeah. And I don't think that character necessarily works in the MCU as it stands right now. So I do think they will have to do some reinventing, and they would be wise to do some reinventing with that character, since the comics really didn't go over well.
Yeah.
So the end of this, Damage Control's chasing Kamran. Is Damage Control going to wind up being our final antagonist?
Looks that way. I mean, I really thought we were going to get at least a part of the way into the episode of them just being sneaky. I tell you what, though, like, that's, I think that they're really setting Bruno up to be, in some ways, kind of like almost Captain America level altruistic, because he really doesn't like Kamran.
No, he
really actively dislikes Kamran. And he's like, oh, dude, I know that you're an literal fugitive, and some kind of superpowered individual. Like, he has every reason to just be like, like somebody come get this guy. And he's totally like, oh no, we're going to, like, you're going to stay here. We'll figure this out. Who does that?
Yeah, no, I think you've definitely got a character, and I think really you've got a character with Kamala that's kind of the same way. I mean, you've got two characters that they're going to do the right thing kind of characters.
It's your morally gray characters are interesting in
oh
their
no
own
for
way.
Sure.
But it's always,
well, I think it's always interesting to have it's the MCU to this point has been the dynamic between the ones who will do anything to win and the ones who will always do the right thing no matter what it costs them.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see kind of how these characters grow into their roles.
Yeah. So yeah, it'll be interesting. I really thought that we were going to get Red Dagger coming back to the States, but apparently there's some one does wonder, why does the United States have multiple warrants out on him? When he's like, what, 20 maybe?
Yeah. So it'll be interesting. Yeah. In the comics, he does move to Jersey City. Whether they do, I mean, in the comics, though, I think he basically shows up as an exchange student,
right,
at the school. So I'll be shocked if they go that route. They also started this while she was like 16, while the actress was like 16, 17 years old. But like the getting it filmed and edited and ready to go, and then the slowdown with COVID and everything, she's 19 years old already.
Right.
And granted, they in universe made a joke about her looking younger than she is, like Ant-Man.
Yeah. I mean, she does though. Like she looks like she's about 12.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not that they're going to have trouble continuing with her being in high school for at least another season.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it'll be real interesting to see. I'm really curious. Nicole, any theories on the finale? You got any theories on the finale? I mean, I think that it's just an action. I think basically we get a standoff with damage control, and we're going to find out a little more about what damage control is up to and why damage control is just basically assumed the role of assuming that all heroes or all people with powers are bad.
Yeah,
because that's definitely the angle they're now taking.
Yeah, I mean, somebody's got to go that direction eventually, right?
Yeah. So yeah, it's going to be. I'm curious because I obviously damage control is going to be the antagonist in the finale. In fact, I'm assuming that when Kamala gets back, that damage control is going to have possibly have Kamran and Bruno in custody.
Yeah. Poor Bruno.
So, I'm anxious to see now. This episode was the shortest of the episodes yet. I hope they don't go shorter. It didn't feel overly short. It felt like everything was paced well. There was no problems pacing wise or anything, but I sure hope they don't go shorter. I'd rather see them go back. The first two episodes were about 50 minutes.
Yeah.
And I'd like to see the finale be about that length.
All right. Nicole doesn't have any theories.
I really don't know where to expect it to go. I mean, obviously we're not I think we just told the most complicated part of the story, which was the family dynamic, the family history. I think that was the heart of this the family was the heart of this whole story.
Yeah.
And that we kind of wrapped that angle, and now we're going to have whatever our fight with damage control that's going to lead into her future in the MCU. I really
thought we were going to be
Joker Boys. Average would be about 45 minutes. Most of the first two were about 50. The next two were about 45, and this one was 40.
Yeah. I really thought that they were going to have a really big face-off with the Noor. I thought that's where we were going. Like one lap, but now they're
that's coming. That's going to tie into Secret Wars whenever we do that.
Well, I meant the Noor that are already here.
Yeah.
Or the Jinn that are here. So it'll be really interesting to see where it's always unfortunate, but
well, we've
predictable.
eliminated them now unless she still has control over some kind of control over Kamran.
I'm saying no.
The thing is, they're not
she
going
will be
to
all
do,
the Sith,
but they're not going to do the. They're not going to do the big comic book villain for this character because it's not going to work in live action. So it's possible that Kamran could become the villain.
That could be interesting. That could be interesting. Yeah, that seems about right. And that's kind of what I'm expecting it to be, about the same length, maybe a few minutes longer than the other one.
Yeah.
So, I do like, hang on, I feel like this is a good summary because I talked at some length about how I just couldn't care less about this show. Whenever it was being advertised, I was like, whatever. Like, I mean, sure, it'll be fun. The kids will enjoy it. But it's really, you know.
Oh, I thought it was going to be like a Nickelodeon show or, you know, Disney or, you know, like the old Disney TV shows.
Right. Yeah.
You know, like the ones from the late 90s, early 2000s. And it really ended up not being that. Oh, Don just popped in. Don, you finished episode 5. What did you think?
He loved it.
But I do agree. I'm not totally sure
tears
that
in your beer.
I do agree, Nicole, that I think this might be my favorite episode, just kind of the scale of some of the things they went for and the kind of the completion of this family story. And now we can move past that in episode 6 into setting up the future for this character.
Yeah, because like we got to keep the big secret from our parents thing. It's been done a lot, you know, and so it's like there's so much just like, you know, if we just tell our parents what was going on, we could just move on. So I'm glad that they've kind of done that now, and we're not going to continue. Yes, the costumes were absolutely beautiful. You're right, Dawn.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that's not to continue to be the main what's the word? The main conflict. That migraine I was talking about, it messes with my ability to find my words.
Joker Voice, give it a watch and then come talk about it with us. We'd love to do that.
Yeah, it's a good one. Yeah, well, maybe we can get a crew.
Yeah, no, we should just do we're going to do our final episode with David and his girlfriend, who's a huge fan. But other than that, I think we should probably just have a big roundtable episode and let everybody pop in and give their thoughts on the series as a whole after the finale. So we'll definitely plan that.
Yep. I think I'm out of things to say. You out of things to
say? I'm
out
of things to say. I really do love this show. It's still my second favorite MCU Disney Plus series. If they hit a solid finale, it'll definitely land in my
all about that
spot.
Finale. All about that finale. Everybody's all about WandaVision to the finale. People are like,
yeah,
it's fine.
And I will tell you the other thing, because the Marvels, I've just not been that excited about Captain Marvel coming back. This show makes me a lot more excited.
Well, and I love Monica Rambeau. Like, Monica Rambeau is great.
Yeah.
And the fact that she comes from South Louisiana
we got Monica
hurt
Rambeau and Kamala Khan. I think that's going to go a long ways to improving the just kind of the general feel of the Marvels movie. So it'd be interesting to see what they do there. Sure. But anyway, I think that's going to do it for tonight. And Joker has committed to the round table, and hopefully Don and Nicole might be able to do that with us as well.
That'll be fun.
And we'll get everybody on and talk about it. But that's going to do it for tonight. So Marisha, until next time, where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram, theoretically. You can find old pictures on Instagram. What is it? What's my Instagram?
Your Instagram?
Yeah.
It's Princesses
_ that's right. Yeah. Princesses _ and _ Padawans. And I'm He Padawans on Twitter.
Yep. You can find me running the Twitter account for this show at sci_fictionary. You can drop us a line at the sciencefictionary@gmail.com. And as always, you can find our podcast as well as the rest of the Red 5 Podcast Network at Red 5 Network on Twitter. And until next time, may the force be with you.
This podcast is part of the Red 5 Network. For more Red 5 Network podcasts, visit red5network.com.